Right now, somewhere in your Slack history, there is a message you sent and never followed up on. It probably said something like, still looking into it. You typed it 3 days ago, maybe longer. Since then, nothing. No update. No found it. No still stuck. Just silence sitting there in a thread your whole team can see. Your manager thinks you're stuck. Your teammates think you're avoiding them. But that's not actually what's happening. What's happening is something much older than Slack, much older than software. And it's running quietly underneath almost every line of code you write. Here's the real reason developers go silent after a bug, and why the silence isn't avoidance. It's a survival response. Think about the moment right before you sent that message. You hit an error you didn't expect. Maybe the stack trace made no sense. Maybe the bug only happened in production, never on your machine. For a second, your brain didn't process this as a technical problem. It processed it as a threat. Psychologist Stephen Porges at the University of North Carolina has spent decades studying how the nervous system reacts to perceived danger. Not just physical danger, but social and professional danger too. His research on the nervous system shows that when you feel exposed, evaluated, or at risk of looking incompetent in front of others, your body can shift into a state of hypervigilance. Tunnel focus. The rest of the world fades. All that's left is the problem in front of you. That's why you go quiet. Not because you don't care about the thread, because your nervous system has decided the thread is now a distraction from survival. So you say, still looking into it, and you mean it. But what you don't say out loud is the part underneath. I don't know if I can fix this, and I don't want anyone watching me find out. Here's where it gets interesting. You'd think the obvious move would be to ask for help immediately. Pull in a teammate. Post the stack trace. Get more eyes on it faster. That's the efficient choice. It's also the choice almost nobody makes in that first hour. Why? Psychologist Ari Kruglansky at the University of Maryland has studied something called the need for cognitive closure, the deep discomfort people feel when a problem is open-ended and unresolved. For most people, that discomfort is mild. For developers, it can be intense because your identity is often quietly fused with your competence. Researcher Adam Waits at Northwestern has written about this kind of identity fusion, how people can come to see themselves as inseparable from the systems they build and maintain. When the system breaks, it can feel like you broke. So instead of asking for help right away, you go inward. You isolate the problem. You isolate yourself with it. Closing the loop privately feels safer than opening it publicly, even though opening it publicly would almost always get you to a fix faster. This is the twist most people miss. Going silent doesn't feel like hiding from the inside. It feels like working hard. It feels responsible. You're not ignoring the thread. You tell yourself you're focused. You're going to swoop back in with a fix and a clean explanation, and the silence will retroactively make sense. But there's a cost to that, and it's not just about the bug. Psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik discovered something in the 1920s that still explains modern Slack behavior almost 100 years later. She found that unfinished tasks stay mentally active in a way finished tasks don't. An open loop nags at you. It takes up space in your head even when you're not actively thinking about it. That message sitting there, still looking into it, isn't just sitting in the channel. It's sitting in your mind too, quietly draining attention from everything else you try to do that day. So while your head's down, trying to look competent, you're actually paying a hidden tax. Decision fatigue researcher Roy Baumeister has shown that mental resources are finite, that every unresolved tension competes for the same limited pool of focus your brain has to spend. The longer that thread stays open, the more of your day it quietly eats, even during meetings that have nothing to do with the bug, even during dinner, even at 11 p.m. when you're trying to fall asleep and your brain pulls the thread back up uninvited. This is the part almost nobody talks about. Going silent after a bug isn't just a communication choice, it's an emotional cost you're paying without realizing you signed up for it. There's also a quieter pattern hiding inside all of this, one that has more to do with how you see yourself than how you see the bug. Psychologist Carol Dweck at Stanford spent years studying the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. The difference between believing your abilities are a fixed measure of who you are versus believing there's something you build over time. When a developer with a more fixed sense of identity hits an unexpected failure, the bug doesn't just feel like a technical setback, it can feel like evidence. proof that maybe you're not as good as your last performance review suggested, proof that gets filed away quietly even if nobody else ever sees it. That's part of why the silence stretches longer than it needs to. You're not just debugging the code, you're managing a private verdict about your own competence, and you'd rather deliver that verdict to yourself in private than have anyone else witness the deliberation. Compare that to a developer with a more growth-oriented relationship to failure. The bug is still frustrating. It still triggers some of that same nervous system response Porges described, but it gets processed differently as information rather than indictment. "I don't understand this yet" replaces "I should already understand this." That single shift in language, small as it sounds, changes whether you reach out in hour 1 or hour 72. And here's the part that might surprise you the most. Your team almost never reads the silence the way you fear they will. You assume silence reads as failure. In reality, most teammates read silence as distance, not incompetence. They don't think less of your skills, they think you've disappeared. And disappearing more than the bug itself is usually what erodes trust over time. The fix isn't the variable that damages your reputation. The disappearing act is. So what actually happens on the strongest engineering teams? The ones where people aren't punished for saying, "I'm stuck," in the open? It isn't that those developers are less anxious about looking incompetent. It's that they've learned, often through repetition, that an early, "I don't know yet, here's what I've tried," gets a faster, kinder response than a polished answer delivered 3 days late. Psychologists Edward Desai and Richard Ryan, known for their work on self-determination theory at the University of Rochester, found that people perform better and feel safer in environments where they have some autonomy over how they're seen, but only when that environment also feels psychologically safe enough to be honest in. Teams that build that safety get more still stuck messages early and fewer disappearing acts later. Think about the last code review where someone left a comment that felt sharper than it probably was. Maybe it was just 3 words. "This seems off." You read it 5 times. You drafted a reply, deleted it, drafted another one. That tiny delay, that flinch before responding, is the same mechanism. Your nervous system briefly treated a comment on a pull request as a threat to your standing, and your brain bought itself time before responding, the same way it bought itself time before updating that Slack thread. That's the modern mirror of all this. It's not really about Slack. It's about what you do every single day in the half-second after something breaks, and you feel that first flicker of exposure. Do you retreat into the silence that feels safe in the moment but costs you for days? Or do you say the harder, smaller thing out loud sooner, even if it's just, "I haven't figured this out yet"? The bug was never really the problem your brain was trying to solve in that silence. The problem your brain was trying to solve was you, and whether you'd still be seen as capable if the answer came late or didn't come at all. So the next time you feel yourself going quiet after something breaks, notice it. Not as weakness and not as focus either. Notice it as your nervous system trying to protect an identity that was never actually at risk in the first place. Because somewhere in your Slack history, there's a message you sent and never followed up on. And the real reason you never went back to update it wasn't the bug. It was you deciding, without ever saying so, that silence felt safer than being seen still figuring it out.